Great British Manufacturing Podcast, brought to you by MTD, MFG and Jefferson.
Hello and welcome to the Great British Manufacturing Podcast. On this week's show we will discuss the positive British manufacturing news from the last 7 days and bring in a special guest who is James Brougham, Senior Economist at Make UK. But before I do that, I just want to mention Factory Now. The Factory Now initiative has been launched to help British manufacturers boost sales, collaborate and reshore. New members are joining the platform all the time, and this week I'd like to welcome InSphere, a technology company focused on developing and implementation of metrology data capture systems for high-value manufacturing processing. Stuart, welcome to the podcast.
Morning, Joe. Looking forward to this week's podcast. Great guests and some very positive stories. Despite what's going on in the world, hopefully we'll put a smile on people's faces this morning.
Indeed, let's jump straight in. Aston Martin have launched another recruitment drive, quite a big one this one.
Absolutely. The car manufacturer is creating more than 100 jobs at its St Athan plant in South Wales, and this is following the launch of its new DBX 707 model. DBX 707, which has been described by Aston Martin admittedly as the world's most powerful luxury SUV, will enter full production later this quarter at the firm's South Wales factory. And as we reported last week, Aston Martin is also recruiting dozens of new apprentices, interns and graduates at this site and also at its headquarters in Gaydon.
Another recruitment drive, this time from defence giant MBDA.
Yeah, absolutely. The missile manufacturer is set to create around about 600 jobs across its UK sites in Bolton, Stevenage and Bristol. The firm, which is a joint venture between BAE Systems, Leonardo and Airbus, was awarded a £550 million MOD contract last year to develop an air-to-ground strike weapon for the UK's F-35 combat aircraft. And according to the firm, many of the jobs on offer will be engineering roles, including mechanical, electrical, systems design and software positions. So lots of good opportunities there for people to join a great company. And
there's more news coming out of our friends at Cornish Lithium.
Yeah, I think you provided this update on your Swarth Guru Twitter account. The Cornish Mineral Exploration and Development Company has secured a heads-of-terms agreement with British energy company iGas to work together evaluating suitable sites where geothermal heat can be developed on a commercial basis. The firms will develop shallow geothermal projects in Cornwall that can supply renewable heat to industrial end users, and they'll also evaluate the potential to extract lithium from geothermal waters. iGas will bring its experience of well-designed dredging and operational management to the project.
And the next one, apologies to all the listeners, Bentley Motors. It feels like we mention these guys every week, doesn't it? But it's with good cause.
Absolutely, there's so much going on there. This is the latest investment. They've £3 million investment has doubled the additive manufacturing capacity at the company's Cheshire headquarters, where all Bentley models are built. A state-of-the-art facility has been applied to a wide range of uses, producing more than 15,000 components in 2021 alone. The expansion will also enable Bentley to utilise advanced technology to create 3D printed vehicle components and offer even greater personalisation for its customer cars. And, as you referred to there, last month the British Mark reported the highest annual sales in its history and announced plans to invest £2.5 billion transforming its proved manufacturing plants.
Okay, Stuart, I'd like to take a brief pause from this week's positive manufacturing news to introduce this week's special guest, James Brougham, Senior Economist at Make UK. James, welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, how do you do?
Really good, thank you. Thanks for joining us. Just to start with, Make UK, we'll learn a little bit about that shortly, but to start with, can we learn a little bit about you, James, your current role and responsibilities?
Sure. So my name is James Brougham. I'm a senior economist at Make UK. I've been with the organisation for just under 3 years. In my role as senior economist, my chief responsibilities are looking after our economic forecasts, producing our reports and outlooks, and most importantly, our quarterly economic outlook. Which is a forecasting and a sort of quarterly look back at how the manufacturing sector in the UK is performing and how it is set to perform for the coming quarter. But also I work across a wide range of policy outputs, especially anywhere where economic analysis or input is required. and do a significant amount of work dealing with government and civil servants on working on how policy can be adapted to best serve the sector.
Wonderful. And for the people that don't know of Make UK, well, and the people who do, I guess, can you give us an overview of the organisation, please?
Sure. Well, Make UK, as we like to say, is the manufacturers organisation. We're the leading representative voice of UK manufacturing. We have offices in London, Brussels, and every English region and Wales. Collectively, we represent 20,000 companies of all sizes, from startups to multinationals, across engineering, manufacturing, technology, and the wider industrial sector. We directly represent over 5,000 businesses who were previously members of what we used to be known as EEF, and now under our new name, Make UK. And everything we do, from providing whether it be essential business support or training and championing the manufacturing industry in the UK, is designed to help the industry compete, innovate, and grow. So beyond what I do, we have a significant business function that covers HR, employment law, health and safety training, environmental and productivity training. And all this advice enables our businesses and our members in the wider manufacturing community to remain safe, compliant, and future focused.
Morning, James. It's Stuart. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for the insight into your career and current role and Make UK. Make UK has just published its annual analysis of the sector. Before we look at the actual findings, would you just give us a brief overview of the report and its purpose, please?
Sure. So this is an output we've had going for quite a few years annually. But in this year, we've taken a very new approach. We've made it a digitally interactive platform. In the past, it used to be a sort of a small fold-out card. And the point of this was for it to be very concise, to inform those that might not be familiar with the manufacturing sector and its significant contribution to the UK economy. And as a way of setting the scene for our other more in-depth policy work, just so that there's a real understanding and we can push the message of just how important the manufacturing sector is to the UK economy. And so really its main purpose is to serve to external stakeholders, but as well across clients, internal people within Make UK. It's a very important. It's important there for accessibility. It's important for it to be there so that everyone can understand just where manufacturing in the UK is positioned, the types of jobs it provides, how well they pay, how much value it adds to the UK economy, and also how the sector is structured through its subsector makeup.
Thank you. And I must say that the way that you've published the information this year has been incredibly well received when we promoted it, and especially, like you say, the interactive elements. I think it just makes it a lot more accessible to people who are possibly outside the manufacturing bubble. So fantastic initiative there. So let's look at the key findings then of the analysis, James. Jobs, economic contribution, investment, exports, etc., etc. Could you just please give us an overview of what the analysis is telling us this year?
Sure. And first of all, it's very, very good to hear you to say that because we think it's a real success, the new format, especially as you mentioned on that accessibility point that anyone on mobile or can quickly pull it up, have a look. It doesn't require having something physical or need to be in person to hand it out. So that's a good change for the future. In terms of the key headline figures from this year's facts, we have I should caveat that the headline output is different from previous years in terms of billions of pounds, which stands at 183 billion. But that is due to a change in how the government calculates its statistics and not necessarily a change in value compared to previous years, as the ONS Blue Book publication in 2021 took a new accurate calculation approach, which has adjusted a lot of the figures. I think what's really important, and we highlight it significantly throughout the facts, is the amount of jobs and how well they're paid. So 2.5 million jobs provided to the UK directly by manufacturing. Of course, there's also an effect through the full-time employment multiplier, i.e. by saying that, I mean the amount of sort of tertiary jobs that are supported directly by those direct jobs. And that stands at almost just under something like 2, so high 1.3 1.7 in terms of the number of tertiary jobs the sector supports beyond its own direct jobs. And of course, 12% higher wages than the average UK salary. So the average manufacturing salary in the UK is 35,000 or 200, and the whole economy average is 31,000, and then the services average is 30,600. So significantly higher average salary than the wider economy, and I think that's really important in dispelling perhaps the more ancient myth that manufacturing is a sort of old and dirty industry, when indeed it's one of the highest paying industries, the most modern and most progressive in the UK today. Other key pullouts include that 51% of the UK's total exports is goods. And I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding that as a goods economy, we don't focus on that anymore, that we're entirely services led. But in terms of exports, the slim majority, i.e. 51% of those exports, is goods. The sector alone is responsible for 64% of all business research and development in the UK, and it's responsible for 15% of investment within the UK.
No, impressive figures, and thanks also for clarifying the output. Some people did ask that why I think last year it was 191, I think, from memory, and this year
that's correct.
But it's a different calculation method. And when we drill down into the different sectors, what's it telling us about the different subsectors within manufacturing, James?
Sure. Well, to set the scene briefly, the top three I'll sort of go down the list a little bit. The top three or so sectors, by far and away the largest subsector of manufacturing UK by terms of the gross value added in sort of sterling value, is the food and drink manufacturing subsector, and then that's followed quite a way off by metal products, and then the mechanical engineering sector, then pharmaceuticals and chemicals, electronics, motor vehicles, paper and printing, other transport, which includes defense, aero, shipping and rail, rubber and plastics, textiles, non-metallic minerals, electrical equipment, and basic metals. And now what we have here in the interactive facts portal is we've developed this tool, and this is historically very, very dense data to understand. But for example, if we look at food and drink, and if you're using the tool, you can click on that, and then you can see just what percentage of exports, what percentage of gross value added, and what percentage of research and development that specific subsector is responsible for in the manufacturing breakdown. So in the case of food and drink is responsible for 6.8% of the UK's total exports of manufactured goods. It's responsible for 17% of the gross value added by manufacturing to the UK economy, and it's responsible for 3% of research and development. Now, by contrast, if we look at something like chemicals and pharmaceuticals, if we click on that, we'll see intuition would follow that chemicals and pharmaceuticals is responsible for 35% of all of manufacturing, all the manufacturing sector's research and development, as it's such a research heavy subsector. And similarly, it's responsible for 15% of all exports of goods and 16% of gross value added. And so what this tool does, and the insight it provides, is that of course everyone has a particular interest in a subsector, perhaps those that work within it, perhaps those that represent on behalf of those subsectors, and being able to have that quick reference to the specific details to that subsector and how it sits within that manufacturing overall sector makeup and exactly what that subsector contributes is very important for highlighting the strengths and the contributions those various subsectors make to the overall manufacturing's contribution to the economy.
Absolutely, and all this information obviously can be found on the Make UK website, and like you say, it's interactive, which makes it a lot easier to understand and digest, certainly from the feedback we've got. Just final question on the report. When we look at the regions, James, what's it telling us about the regional breakdown?
Well, I think perhaps the pull-up thing, we've had some comments about this, is how the manufacturing salary within that region compares to the region's average salary, so specific to that region. And now, in every region in the UK, barring a notable exception, the manufacturing salary is significantly higher than the regional economy salary. So, for example, in the East Midlands, it's 121% of the regional economy salary, so i.e. 21% higher. The exception I mentioned is London, where because of the services dense nature of the city and those very high salaries in the center of the city skewing the distribution, it comes in at 91%. Then elsewhere in the country, it's higher. The same can be said as well for the southwest, where it's marginally lower. And some notable standouts include the northwest, where it's 32.1% higher than the regional salary. Now, in terms of that regional distribution, we see where manufacturing, also on this tool, we see where the employees, the spread of those employees, we see exactly which region is responsible for how much output, how much manufacturing output in sterling value they're responsible for. And overall, we can see which area of the UK is most export intense. So we have that map colored that way. So we see down naturally towards the southeast, which is a very common port location. We see a very intense export intensity. And in some other places, such as the northeast, we see that a little cooler in terms of its total intensity. Of course, manufacturing, and in terms of where the people employed, where the sort of density of companies and density of people employed, despite being quite a regionally distributed industry, there is a nucleation within the Midlands area. So that's the West Midlands and East Midlands areas, quite famous and infamous in some cases for the automotive industry. A lot of aerospace companies are congregated there.
Absolutely. And finally, sorry, just one last question. How does the UK compare with other countries, James? Question that's often asked and by our listeners, so it'd be interesting to find out your thoughts and findings.
That's a very important question, and I think as we were saying, one of the core aims of this output is to dispel myths about manufacturing. And as I mentioned at the start, there is this misunderstanding that the UK isn't a manufacturing nation anymore. And if we look at that world comparison, the UK remains 9th in the world in terms of the value of its manufacturing output. And in the past, when we've run sort of spot research in open surveys asking, where do you think if you had to place where the UK is in terms of its total manufacturing prowess in terms of value output, we hear figures of 25th, 30th, and it is in the top 10, and that hasn't changed for about 4 years. In about 5 years ago, it's a little bit higher. It changed positions, but it hasn't dropped out the top 10. And it doesn't look set to for a while during this recovery and a strong growth in output. Of course, you have certain countries like China, and then long and far ahead in terms of the value output. But it quickly becomes the case that the UK is very competitive in terms of its total output with other major manufacturing nations. And that's something that we really want to shout about. That's something that I think the UK should be proud of. And I think it's something that we really need to highlight to government to continue to remind policymakers and stakeholders that manufacturing is very important to the UK economy, and indeed manufacturing, the UK's manufacturing offer to the world is significant.
Excuse me. Yeah, very well put, James. My question really is, obviously, I think from memory we've been as high as 7th in the recent memory. What do we do to get ahead of France, Italy, countries like that?
What do we do to get ahead of France? That's a good question. Of course, one that sound like a broken record perhaps, and it's a challenge for all manufacturing nations, particularly European manufacturing nations. It is the productivity challenge. That's perhaps the quickest way, the productivity puzzle, and I know that's been talked about ad nauseam. So I'll talk in the short term about how manufacturers, or indeed various industries in these various countries, can best position themselves. It's going to be about taking, or with the help of the relevant national governments, making the most of this recovery period. And we're in a period where order books are extremely strong. and they look set to continue that way. But the supply chain challenges are extreme, and so we're seeing very pronounced situations, not just in the UK, really across many of the European economies, that the industries are struggling to meet their order demand. So they're struggling to get the output up to a level to satiate those orders at a rate. Now, this demand boom is likely to last, but it won't necessarily last forever. And so the best way to take advantage and maximize growth in this period is to, of course, use the saying, not miss the boat. But that's easier said than done, because those limitations are often outside individual manufacturers' hands, whether that be unable to get the labor because it's not available in the market, unable to get the raw materials input because the price inflation has spiraled out of control, or indeed lead times are far too long for you to deliver to your customers. And now manufacturers are doing all they can to get around that, but in the UK and other European countries as well, it's important that the government not necessarily intervenes in any way they can, but they need to focus on removing any unnecessary frictions that may exist. And of course, slow customs and border processes, of course, exacerbate those frictions. Taxes, so premature taxing, which we might talk about in a moment, during a recovery period, may turn out to be an anchor on growth. So I've sort of gone on a bit of a tangent there, but those are really the things that are going to adjust that top 10 lineup, or at least influence it in the coming immediate couple of years. Is about the rate at which these individual manufacturing economies are going to be able to take the most advantage of this frenzied demand period at the moment.
Yeah, very well put, and I'm sure collectively we can do it. But if we go back, if we leave the audit at the moment, what's currently on the agenda at Make UK? Have you got any planned campaigns?
We do. We have our focus on two things we're calling for, and we'll be coming out publicly with this on Monday. And we've been talking about it for a moment, and we think it's ill-timed, and that is the national insurance increase. And so that planned increase we see as an anchor on growth. We do understand the need for the public purse to be recouped somehow following 2 years of such extreme government spending. But it's our view that it's ill-timed and illogical to tax the supply side, i.e. the labor side, and it's astounding at the moment, frankly, that giving the challenges within the manufacturing sector for accessing labor, which have never been worse in as long as research history goes back, because the ONS data series goes back 20 years. And it highlights that the manufacturing vacancy is at 4 per 100, which is a 91% increase compared to March of 2020. And for comparison, the oil economy has only seen, while vacancies in the overall economy are high as well, they've only gone up by about 60, 62, 63%, something to that effect. And so making it more difficult and more costly at the moment for manufacturers to hire, when they quite literally can't get the staff at the moment, is quite an astounding position to take. It's going to be detrimental and weigh on the challenge that already exists. And we think, while we do understand the public purse needs to be recovered, we think this is best done through means of recouping that through growth. So through means of taxes on growth, whether that be through taxes on output, on value, and so on and so forth. But that way, the public purse can be recouped in line and commensurately with the business community's growth and recovery. Because as it stands, this taxes the manufacturing sector before they really have the opportunity to get out the gate. And we think during this fragile recovery period, that would be ill-timed. So we're calling for that increases sort of temporary suspension until the economy is in a more robust position. Secondly, I would like to mention that this is perhaps more exciting. Is you may recall a policy announced by the Chancellor a little while back called the super deduction. And that was very well received at the time. In that Chancellor's speech, it was actually when we did some field research, we found out it was the most positively received announcement of the whole bevy of announcements. However, over the years, we've learned it's fallen a little flat. i.e. that it's been popular, it's been used, but there are certain pitfalls to it that make it just fall short of the mark of being a really excellent policy. Now, of course, to those that don't understand what the super deduction is, it is a above and beyond tax deductible incentive to invest. So it's 130% tax deductible allowance on your first year capital investments. But critically, there are some exclusions, and those are there are quite a few exclusions, but the chief ones are the exclusion to leased goods and the exclusion to second-hand or used goods. And why this is so important is because SMEs, incumbent manufacturers in the SME space, are much more likely to invest through these means, whether it be leasing or in the used and second-hand machinery space. And so this policy disproportionately affects them, and it means that the larger companies who would be typically more likely to pay cash upfront for new significant investment, they're able to take the most advantage of this deduction. So it's slightly regressive in that nature. And so we would like to see that amended. But most importantly about the super deduction is that it has the real power and opportunity to be a longer term benefit to solve or a step towards solving the problem of systemic underinvestment in UK manufacturing, which has been an issue that long predates COVID and long predates Brexit. We have a systemic underinvestment issue in the UK in manufacturing compared to our international peers. And we're calling for things like the super deduction, or indeed the super deduction itself, or through some other permutation, perhaps under a different name, to be brought back into a much longer term. So, at least a 5-10 year horizon, as this will allow the widest amount of the sector to take advantage of this, to plan their investment, because in its current form, it was announced and it's only running for 2 years. And of course, it was announced and running for 2 years, half of which being amongst the pandemic, where cash is tight and manufacturers might not have the spare capital, and indeed don't have the risk appetite to part with that capital at the time. So many won't be taking advantage of that because they might be unable to, or perhaps they don't want to, and that's a shame. And we think it has the real opportunity to step in the right direction. We see it as essentially cost moot to the state, because of course any deductibles they're giving to businesses, it's going in through investment, it's going in through enhanced productivity, it's going in through eventually enhanced GDP and output for the overall economy. So we see it as a very, very good policy. And so we're strongly calling for that to get a second coming with a much longer horizon, so better plans can be made and better effective utilization of it can be made, and of course adjustments to just how things are excluded, so that the wider spectrum of businesses can take advantage of it, and so it has an even effect across the business size spectrum.
Yeah, the latter. It's a very good point, well made. There's a lot of appetite for investment in the UK manufacturers, but when you look at the SME sector, some of these investments are a 10-year plan, aren't they? So it's as good as the system is, it does need to be long term.
You're exactly right, and that's where the main incompatibility comes, is between a 2-year pro-investment, well-received policy on the back of the pandemic versus 5 to 10 year investment cycles. So for many, it was simply shrugged off as that's incompatible with our business model, as attractive as it is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what are the main challenges and opportunities for UK manufacturers this year and beyond, I guess?
Well, we're unfortunately going to see more of it. It's been going on probably for about 2 quarters now, and it's continuing to come to a head as manufacturers' margins are under attack. And of course, what I am talking about is costs, is input costs. So in both material costs, in labor costs, and very infamously at the moment, energy costs. So in terms of material costs, the producer price inflation has been going up at an alarming rate. It's at an alarming level at approximately 13%. And we've seen through separate research, we researched what the tipping point for manufacturers would be, and that comes out at about 20%. So that's where 51% of the manufacturing sector suggests that a sustained, if that input price inflation gets to a 20% figure, then 51% of manufacturers say that their business would be unviable. It would have catastrophic implications for their business model.
Do you know how that compares to the rest of the world, out of interest?
What the threshold for cost increase?
Yeah, well, but both really. What cost increases other regions are seeing, plus the impact?
Yes, sure. So the cost increase is largely a global phenomenon in which, to a certain degree, why, as I alluded to earlier, the government doesn't have too much power to influence that directly. Where they do have power is to adjust the frictions on certain flows of goods. But the costs on raw materials is a real global phenomenon. So all these international manufacturing communities are facing very similar challenges with their raw materials. Labor is a slightly different one. So our labor costs are going up. That is being fed from two things. It is, well, quite a few things, but I'll focus on two of them. Is first of all, it's now as people are saying, a worker-led economy. As in the post-pandemic world, there's changing attitudes towards hours, changing attitudes towards early retirement, and especially seeing as manufacturing's typically an on-site job. It makes it harder in the post-pandemic world. The pool is often smaller for those that you're able to pick from. Secondly, following the UK's exit from the EU, this is particularly prevalent for certain subsectors. So, for example, I'll pick out the food and drink subsector. The added difficulty of hiring labour from the continent is limiting the ease with which manufacturers can secure that labour, and that's particularly pertinent for those in the food and drink sector during seasons of, say, seasonal work. I just want to touch on energy costs as well, because it would be wrong not to. They have been soaring significantly. Now, many manufacturers are adjusting their practices to compensate, but it's really just come to a head since many had to renegotiate their contracts at the start of the year. It's approximately a quarter, if I'm getting that figure correct, quarter suspect that it will take more than 2 years for these prices to settle. And then a further quarter think it will take at least over a year for these prices to settle. So what that means is that the majority of the industry is really dug in and entrenched for at least a year of cost onslaught. And that applies across the labor market, materials market, and the energy market. And now, of course, manufacturers are raising their prices to compensate as well at record levels. However, they're not commensurate to the rate of cost increase. Because when manufacturers raise their prices as well, they have to take in international considerations to remain competitive. And indeed, while other international manufacturers are also raising their prices, there's a fine line between covering these rapidly soaring costs and immediately making yourself uncompetitive. But an amusing anecdote is many of our members that we talk to, you'll pick up the phone to a supplier, you'll pick up the phone to a customer, and you'll hear a double-digit, 12, sort of just over 10% price increase, 12% price increase on your inputs. That sounds fine. Put the phone down. So that's absolutely phenomenal that we're in a position where everyone's roundly expecting 12, say 10 to 15% price increases and won't bat an eyelid, which is a ludicrous thought. Say 5 years ago, you'd be fighting over every percentage because the tidal wave of cost pass through in the industry is significant. And what's very important for the wider economy, and indeed the Bank of England will be paying a lot of attention to this, is the implications for consumer inflation and the eventual impact on consumers. As producer input price inflation is so high, it will trickle through into consumer inflation. There already is very high consumer inflation, but it's that pressure that's built up in the system in the input side that means that pressure is going to be there for at least the rest of the year, likely into the first half of next year. Even if the more typical inflationary challenges cool down, that pent-up inflation in the supply side, where that pass on of costs is trickling through, really will, to use the metaphor, affect the price of bread for the normal person.
Yeah, I know we said we wouldn't keep you long, but apologies, I've got another question. What can we do about the energy prices? I know we're looking at the green energy and things like this, but and is there anything we can do on VAT and things? I know it's reduced for many businesses, but is there any way we can go further?
Yes, well, as is quite talked about, we pay a lot more for our commercial energy in the UK, so manufacturing specifically, than European manufacturers. Now, there are those that call for us to mimic what some governments, particularly in France and Germany, are doing with their energy markets. For UK manufacturers, I think there is an ambition that this is a storm that we'll weather, and I think there's not a significant appetite in the moment in government to intervene significantly with this. I think they're watching it very closely. I think they have in their minds a threshold at which significant intervention will occur. Now, of course, with recent geopolitical events, that threshold may be met, and there might be need for significant action from the government to control and sort of intervene in the energy market. As it stands, prices are extremely high. However, with the input price inflation and the internal intra-industry price inflation, it's being absorbed just about. But it really is. It's quite fascinating. You know, when will the last straw be for manufacturers' margins? Because following absorbing labor costs, absorbing material costs, passing them on with an industry, and now from left field, we have an assault on energy costs. So it's quite a lot for manufacturers to deal with. It's something that is being watched very closely. I won't hazard a guess about what should be done. That would be too much looking into my crystal ball about energy prices. But as is quite sort of evident, those manufacturing industries that are particularly energy intensive are, of course, at the butt of this circumstance here, as they're proportionally using a lot more energy. It's costing a lot more, and so that's actually compounding the issue within the materials market, as they have a proclivity to produce less or halt production on their energy intensive outputs, which of course exacerbates the issue we see, as we talked about earlier in this in the conversation, about the limited supply within the UK and indeed globally for manufacturing materials.
James, wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an education. We'll have to do this again, but really interesting stuff. And thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you, my absolute pleasure.
Stuart, interesting that one. Really good guest, James. Thanks for coming on. But a fascinating insight.
No, absolutely, and the stats speak for themselves. You know, ninth largest manufacturer in the world, 183 billion, 2.5 million people employed in the sector. So, well done to Make UK to publicising and promoting, that content to a wider audience.
Yes, let's get back on with the news. This is an interesting one. Lunaz, it's ramping up production and creating new jobs. For those people that don't know of Lunaz, just tell people what they do and if they can afford one of their toys.
Probably can't afford one, but they specialise in the restoration and electrification of classic cars. Some people take umbrage with that, but what they do is extraordinary, to be honest with you. They will be releasing more build allocation to meet the soaring demand for its stable of electric classic cars. The company will also increase production capacity to 110 vehicles per year, which is a 50% increase in total build slots versus 2020. Bit of background: in December last year, Lunaz announced the establishment of Britain's largest remanufacturing and electrification facility, which will be adjacent to its current home opposite Silverstone Grand Prix circuits. And this will take the company's total production space to 130,000 square feet over 2 sites, and that will make it the largest employer manufacturer at the technology cluster in Silverstone.
Fantastic. And Saran, they're about to open a new facility in Telford.
Yeah, the packaging manufacturer is planning to open what will be its third factory in Telford, and this follows a multi-million-pound investment, which will create up to 100 new jobs. The site in Halesfield has added approximately 40,000 square foot of additional manufacturing space, and this will house its board division, as well as allow further investment in eco-friendly packaging technologies.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. That I live fairly close to Telford, and that's not a manufacturer I've come across. It just goes to show, doesn't it? Speaking of new factories, this time it's again pretty close to me, Birmingham.
Yeah, construction of IMI Truffalo Marine's new 50,000 square foot production design and HQ facility is completed at Birmingham's Advanced Manufacturing Hub in Aston. The firm is part of IMI Critical Engineering, the world-leading provider of critical flow control solutions. It enables vital energy and process industries to operate safely, cleanly, reliably, and more efficiently. A bit of marketing speak there from the company. The firm will relocate from its existing site in Wilton, and the move is expected to create more employment opportunities in Birmingham, which is always good, and also future-proof the existing workforce there.
Yeah, and to finish with, Somerset as a new aerospace facility, doesn't it, Stuart? A nice one to finish on.
Absolutely, it's good to focus on the southwest. The new £10 million Aerospace Centre is dedicated to innovation, collaboration, and sustainable aviation. And this is one of just a handful of aerospace innovation centres nationwide. It's officially opened in Somerset. The project, which has been led by Somerset County Council, is a hub for collaboration and innovation on new products. It's located adjacent to world-leading aerospace manufacturers Leonardo's site, which has been Leonardo has been a key partner in this project.
Yeah, nice one to finish on that. But as I say, there's plenty more news on the website, mtdmfg.com. There's plenty more news. Please do go and take a look. As I say, we don't have time to cover all in this podcast. Please download the MTD MFG app from all your usual app stores. If you want to appear on the podcast, drop us an email, podcast@mtdmfg.com. Failing that, reach out to us on any social media platform. A big thank you to Stuart and James, senior economist at Make UK. But as always, the biggest thank you goes to you guys at home for taking time to listen to us. See you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Great British Manufacturing Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating and a review. You can find us on Twitter using @MTDMFG and @Jefferson_MFG.